Hi, this is Zach. A few weeks back I actually managed to break one of my Nighthawk 200 frames for the first time. Snapped the arm, and since it's a single piece base plate, there's not much I can do about that other than to replace the base plate. I've decided not to do that. Instead, I've decided to order in a TransTec Zoro frame, and this will be the unboxing. So, alright, simple instructions. This is the 195mm Zoro frame. Apparently weighs 75 grams, and at first glance it looks like it's a pretty simple build, although not much space to build stuff into. So you get two pieces of aircraft grade aluminium where you have to fit all your components in, a single 4mm base plate. So you've got a few carbon bits, including a equipment platform, screws, battery strap. They've supplied a SMA header cable that you can solder to a VTX to simplify your build. The Zoro also came with an LED board which has switches on it to select your colors rather than being able to control it through your flight controller. But I can't tell how to mount it to this frame because the screws don't go anywhere and there are no holes in the LED board to use zip ties. So I'll quickly weigh everything and we'll see how it goes. Frame itself, 51.3 grams. So now I'm weighing the additional components that the frame came with. It comes to 35.6 grams. So in addition to the base plate, that makes the frame 87 grams in total, which is a little bit more than the advertised 75 grams. So this is kind of also an unboxing of the HGLRC F4 Flame flight controller, which has a Betaflight OSD as well as a PDB built in. And as you can see, it is covered in capacitors, apparently more than 90, and it's supposed to provide clean power supply to all the components. I'm also going to be using BLHeli D-Shot ready 30A ESCs, powered by DYS, but there's no actual DYS branding on it. So I think these are a clone. Hopefully will do the job. I'm just going to try and install a Foxeer Switcher VTX with a short little extension. As you can see, I've started my build and I'm just pausing for a moment to give a few observations. Firstly, the frame was a little bit rough, so I've sanded the edges and it's come up okay. Secondly, it doesn't come with a foam pad underneath to protect your battery, so you'll have to find your own foam. Thirdly, it doesn't come with any standoffs for your component mountings, so you will need to have your own nylon standoffs. And now I'll move on to how tight this build is going to be. So if you're like me and using a all-in-one controller, then you should be able to build it shell mounted directly to the base plate with just enough clearance to have that board off the base plate, because you still need to run your battery strap underneath the board, so you need at least 3mm of clearance. That's going to be tight for me because my USB plug is actually underneath the board. So I've used a couple of nylon nuts underneath, and then just for a bit of extra space I've also used some little rubber grommets that I had. And that gives me about 4mm of clearance and just enough to screw the board down on top. For those that are going to have a PDB, a standoff, and then your flight controller on top, you're not going to be able to squeeze it in this configuration because the chassis actually overlaps the edges of your flight controller. So there's no way you can stack two boards together. But the solution to that is to use the extra 4mm carbon standoffs that the kit comes with on the front and the back, and that way you've got an extra 4mm of clearance before you run into trouble. So yeah, it should suit those that are going to use a dual board setup. You still need to keep it very tight, but it should be fairly manageable. So this is my initial build. As you can see, it's a very tight fit and it wouldn't really be suited for a first time builder unless you wanted a challenge. On hindsight, I should have bought a VTX with the SMA plug straight out the back rather than a pigtail, because one with a pigtail means you can only really mount it underneath the equipment tray, as I have here, making it very difficult to reach the configuration button on the VTX. I've also got my receiver in a pretty bad spot. It's currently blocking the slots for the camera strap if you were to put an HD camera on top. Ideally the VTX would be on top of the platform and the receiver would be strapped underneath the equipment tray there. The quad weighed in at a respectable 319 grams, but on testing, unfortunately, I had a lot of vibration affecting the flight controller, which actually made the motors sound and feel as if they were desyncing. I then installed grommets using zip ties, but this wasn't a very good solution because after clipping a few branches, the zip ties would actually break and you'd end up with a badly vibrating quad again. So I ended up swapping in some of these Realacc anti-vibration mounts that I just happened to get in the mail after I did my first tests, and swapping them in, it's actually resolved the vibration issues really well. But I ended up also installing some of the grommets that I had underneath each of the motors, squishing them down about halfway and using Loctite, and that's turned out really well because now I get minimal vibrations throughout the quad and the flight controller seems to be behaving quite well. As you can see, I've also installed a capacitor in line with the main power XT60 connector just to smooth out the signal a bit, because the F4 board, while it has a lot of filtering and capacitors, there was still noise in my video every time I throttled up, so the capacitor helps to just smooth it out a little bit more. One observation after I've crashed the quad a few times, the weakest point seems to be the antenna mount itself, the slim bit of carbon sticking out the back. If your antenna gets knocked around a bit, it's already got a bit of a twist in it after really only one crash into a bush. So I do anticipate that after a few hard knocks it's probably going to crack and break, and I'm going to be stuck without a way to mount an antenna. Maybe having to find someone with a 3D printer to print me off something a bit stronger. I'm happy to report that after finally fixing all of the vibration issues I had, including in the camera housing itself, where there was a little bit of a looseness in the board and a little bit of foam had to be shoved into the casing, it's finally flying well. I had to move the antennas as well because they snapped off after a couple of crashes, and now the antennas are strapped against the arm. But overall, this little frame is absolutely awesome. It is flying at least, it feels like 50% faster than my previous Nighthawk H quad, even though it's using the same 2300 kV Emax motors from my previous frame. It just feels like you blip the throttle and it's shot into the sky. So it, efficiency wise and speed wise, it's a big step up from what I'm used to. I'm looking forward to some more batteries through it. I'm hoping I don't snap that antenna mount, which is the weakest part of the frame. And if I do, I might try to reinforce it with some 3D printed or even plywood parts. But until that happens, I'm just going to keep putting packs through it and enjoying it. So the next time you see this little quad, hopefully I've got some DVR or HD footage up for you to have a look at. Cheers and thanks for watching.